Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Don Friedman, the CEO of The Truth About Your Future. We're excited to have you here. Just a couple housekeeping things. As you can see on the screen, if you're looking for the network and password to the Wi-Fi, that's up there. Bathrooms are directly behind. Most people here have signed up for dinners tonight. If not, you can see Michelle, who is at the reg desk right outside the room. I would also add we are big fans of questions, so we will have a mic on each side of the room should anybody have any questions for any of the sessions. The program does qualify for CE, CFP, and IWI. I believe it's 11. For IWI, you submit yourself. For CFP, we'll get your number, or you'll give us your number, and then we will turn those in. We're super excited. When Rick and I thought about this conference 6+ months ago, we were like, obviously, presidential election. And so we wanted to, not only from a topic standpoint, where we're covering everything from the new administration's impact on stocks, bonds, the economy, real estate, crypto, et cetera. We did this intentionally like a month after the election because obviously Mr. Trump has not let anyone down in terms of what's going on and how do we reposition portfolios, et cetera. So again, we're excited to have you here today. In addition to the topics I talked about, we've got 9 different RIAs here, leading RIAs. We have a panel of CEOs, a panel of CIOs, and a panel of senior wealth advisors. So we hope you get a lot out of this. Like I said, if you have any questions, ask during the session. If you have any questions, in terms of where anything is or anything, just ask us at the registration booth. And with that, I'll turn it over to our founder, Rick Edelman.
Thank you, Don. So thank you all for being here. We're very excited, as Don said, about the agenda we've put together. It's going to be a whole lot going on really quick. I'm going to kick off this morning with the only PowerPoint presentation of the entire conference. We hate PowerPoint sessions because it's just like death by PowerPoint. I've got about 25 minutes and about 80 slides to run through with you. So I'm going to blow through these really, really quick. One of the themes that we try to convey at this event is to get you thinking about topics that most are not thinking about. And one of the most impactful is the 60/40 glide path. Most of us have been doing what we're doing for decades. We're very successful at it. You've got a lot of assets under management. You have a lot of happy clients. You've been performing very well for them. And most of us, because we've been doing this for so many years, are running our portfolios pretty similarly because we've now learned over the decades the right way to run money. So we're using diversification, we're investing with a long-term perspective, we're engaging in portfolio rebalancing, we're doing dollar cost averaging and tax loss harvesting. We know how to do it, we know how to do it right. And we know how to do it with an eye toward making sure that the money lasts as long as the client does. Because that's the number one fear clients have, right, is that they might run out of money. So we use commonly the 60/40 glide path. Where we start off with an equity heavy portfolio. As the client ages, we reduce the equity allocation, and we create that glide path either to retirement or all the way to their life expectancy. The message I want to convey to you this morning is that glide path is dead. If you are still anchoring your portfolio management on the 60/40 glide path, you're actually not only doing your clients a huge disservice, it could be accused in the future of actually being negligent. So I want to share with you why the 60/40 glide path is dead and what you need to do about it. And it all comes down to this single word, nanotechnology. Nanotech is behind all of the technological innovation that we're experiencing in society. Everybody's paying attention to AI and robotics, but it all comes down to nanotech. In the 1970s, a single computer filled an entire room. You've heard of Moore's Law, Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, who said that every 2 years, the price of a computer gets cut in half, and its size gets cut in half, and its computing power doubles. That 24-month prediction that he made in the 1960s actually is now down to about 18 months. So even Moore's Law is itself dropping. The illustration of that computer in the 1970s filling an entire room shrunk. By the 1980s, that computer went from the size of a room to sitting on a desktop. By the 1990s, that computer sat in your lap. By the 2000s, it fit in the palm of your hand. By the 2010s, it fit on your wrist. And this decade, it's now the size of a grain of rice and implantable in the human brain. And you've heard, no doubt, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, where they're actually already doing this for people who are paralyzed to give them motor control over their legs, even though they're unable to move because of their disability. It's projected that by the end of the decade, we're going to have uplinks from our brain directly into the internet through these Neuralinks. This is all because scientists have discovered that the difference between sand and silicon is simply how you rearrange the atoms. The difference between coal and gold is how you rearrange the atoms. The difference between an old, ill individual and a young, healthy one is how you rearrange the atoms. Which means, if you're alive in 2030, you're probably going to live to age 100 and beyond. I said this to my mom a few years ago. She was 92 years old in 2022. She didn't survive COVID. And at age 92, I told this to her. And I said, Mom, if you're alive in 2030, you're going to live to 100 or beyond. And she said, I'm not going to last that long. And I said, well, what do you want me to put on your tombstone? And she said, missed it by that much. We are, in fact, living longer than ever. 1,000 years ago, life expectancy for humans was 19. In 1900, life expectancy was 47. Today, it's 89, according to the IRS. 90% of all the people in world history who ever made it to age 90 are alive right now. In the 1800s, the 5 leading causes of death were childbirth, pyemia, puerperal fever, syphilis, and child disease. Anybody here tell me what pyemia is? I never heard of it either. But it was one of the 5 leading causes of death in the 1800s. Fast forward to the 1900s, these are the 5 leading causes of death. When's the last time you heard of anybody in the United States dying of cholera? Medical science eradicated these diseases. And it's all because of advances we've made with clean water, antibiotics, anesthesia, and vaccines. We're now taking this scientifically even further. We cracked the human genome, which was originally a 13-year project that cost over $10 billion. Now it can be done in 2 weeks for about $300. By the end of the decade, it'll be a free app on your smartphone. CRISPR technology, introduced in 2015, called the medical breakthrough of the century, allowing scientists to edit your DNA as easily as we cut and paste in a Word document. They're actually altering DNA of babies still in the womb to eliminate diseases they would otherwise be born with. Focused ultrasound is considered today the best kept secret in medicine. There are already hundreds of diseases, illnesses, and genetic diseases that they're able to cure with ultrasound. We've all had ultrasounds, we know what they are and how they work, but what focused ultrasound does, instead of a single beam of sound waves so that they can take a picture of your belly, focused ultrasound takes 3 sound waves, coalesces them to a single point like GPS, and with a high focus ultrasound beam, they can destroy a single cell in the body without harming the surrounding tissue. The uses of this are astonishing, and if you just Google focused ultrasound, you're going to want to ask your doctor about it, who chances are doesn't even know a whole lot. And what's coming this year is the Human Cell Atlas. They'll have this project completed by the end of this year. It's been underway for the past decade. They are mapping the entire body and identifying all the different cell types in the human body. They have found thousands of them in the gut. They have found hundreds of them in the human brain. And as a result of this, they're able to identify what the cells do, how they operate, and how to either replicate or prohibit the individual cell activity in the body. We've all heard of stem cell activity. Now they're going deeper into all of this. That's coming at the end of this year. The result of all of this is that scientists are telling us that by 2040, they will have cured heart disease, respiratory illness, diabetes, cancer of all sorts, obesity, and addictions. These are the leading causes of death today, just as pyemia or syphilis was 100 years ago, and these will be cured over the next 10 to 15 years. By 2050, these are going to be the leading causes of death in America. Accidents. We're just going to be falling down the stairs breaking our necks. Not a whole lot medical science can do about that. Murder, suicides, overdoses, and euthanasia. We're going to be dying because our friends and family are going to be killing us. So these are going to be the leading causes of death. What is right now one of the leading social issues in America, abortion, is going to be where we're killing babies, is going to be replaced by euthanasia where we're killing old people. So this is going to be a massive social shift, all brought about by medical innovation and technology. And this is why clients are asking, will my money last as long as I do? If I live to age 100, will my money last? Because what they then say to you, you've heard this how many times, I want a guaranteed lifetime income. I don't want risk, I don't want volatility, I don't want uncertainty. I want to know that I will have guaranteed, big important word there, income for as long as I can live. And the three primary sources of this, of course, Social Security, pensions, and annuities, and all three of them have huge problems due to the changing social issues we're facing today. The maximum Social Security benefit is $5,100 a month. The average, by the way, is about $1,900. So your clients, who are far more likely to be getting that number because your clients are wealthy, are getting massively more money out of Social Security than the average US retiree. The problem is the ability of the Social Security system to deliver on that income. When FDR created Social Security in 1935, there were 159 workers for every retiree. FDR knew that nobody was going to live to 62 to get their Social Security benefit. They're going to be dead by then, because remember, in 1900, life expectancy was 47. So they calculated if you do make it to 62, you'll be dead by 65. Maybe we'll pay out a little bit of benefit to you for a little while, but the amount of money you get out of the system is a fraction of the money you put into the system through payroll tax. And that's what allowed Social Security to be so successful for so many decades. FDR never contemplated my mother getting benefits to age 92, or my grandmother who got benefits to age 101. The system was never contemplating that. But still, we had an awful lot of workers paying into the system compared to the number of workers or retirees taking money out of the system. But today, it's radically changed. Because we don't have the production of as many babies as we used to have, and we don't have, therefore, as many workers paying into the system as we used to have, we now have, instead of 159 people working for every retiree, we now have 2.6. We don't have enough money going into the Social Security system compared to the amount of money that's coming out of it, because so many people, the big problem with old people, they just keep getting older. They don't die. And so we keep having to give them benefit checks. And the result of all that is that for the first time since 1982, payroll taxes are not enough to pay for all the benefits we're distributing. And that is forcing the Social Security Administration to turn to the trust fund to make up the shortfall. And by 2032, that trust fund will be depleted, which means the only money left over to pay out to beneficiaries will be the payroll taxes that we collect. And those payroll taxes are only paying 76% of the benefits. By law, Social Security can only pay out the money it has. Social Security is not allowed to borrow, and it has no other revenue resource. So if Congress does nothing, remember Trump says repeatedly, he said it again last week, that he will not touch Social Security. Biden said it too, and so did Kamala Harris. Everybody in Capitol Hill says we're not touching Social Security, that third rail of American politics. When they say we're not touching Social Security, what they're really saying, whether they know it or not, is that they are guaranteeing in 2032 all Social Security benefits will be cut 24%. for every retiree, which means for your clients who are getting the maximum, in about 7-8 years, those checks are going to get cut to $3,900. Now that's going to be a real annoyance for your wealthy clients, but imagine the average American who's getting $1,900 and is going to watch that get cut to about $1,300. When they get, most Americans, they get about half of their income from Social Security. We're going to see millions of US households unable to make their mortgage or rent payments, unable to buy food, unable to pay for medicine. This is going to be a huge social crisis, and Congress is going to be forced to deal with this between now and 2032, and they only have two choices. They can either reduce the benefits, which is politically unpopular, or they can raise the taxes, which is politically unpopular, which is why every president has kicked the can. None of them are willing to deal with it because they'll let it be the next guy's problem. And Trump's not going to deal with it either. He's going to let it be his successor's problem, who will probably not deal with it either, and let it be that successor's problem. That takes us to annuities. The problem with annuity contracts, even though they offer to provide you guaranteed lifetime income, is that their actuarial data assumes that the annuitants will die in their 80s. Because historically, when you look at all the data, that's what you project. They know that people who buy annuities live longer than the average because the people who buy annuities are affluent, and the more affluent you are, the longer your life expectancy. But they're still assuming an age 85 or age 90 life expectancy. What happens if everybody who's been buying annuities doesn't die as they're told in their 80s, and they defiantly insist on living to 95 or 100 or 105? Will those annuity contracts be able to continue paying out the guaranteed incomes that they've been promised? The crisis here is that the annuitants won't realize the problem until they're in their 90s. And by which time, what are they going to be able to do about it? And the reason this is such a crisis is because the industry has been exploding. Last year alone, nearly $500 billion, half a trillion, was put into annuity products. That's up 23% from a year ago because investors are getting older, we're getting more conservative in our investment strategy, we want to be more risk averse, and we love the sales pitch of guaranteed lifetime income that annuities are offering. Are these retirees positioning themselves for a crisis in their 90s that they are not aware of? And then finally, there are pension funds. The same worker-retiree ratio is a problem. Companies are promising pension benefits to their workers, not taking into consideration that those retirees aren't conveniently dying at age 80. They are persisting in living into their 90s, forcing the companies to pay benefits longer than they ever projected, with a worker base that is smaller than ever due to layoffs, downsizing, M&A, synergy, and all the other good stuff. You add another wrinkle, if you look at the projected returns of these pensions, they are all assuming they're going to earn 7.5%, 8%, 9% or more. They are not generating the returns that were projected. And the reason they're projecting such high returns is that the higher they project, the less they need to collect in fundraising. The less payroll deduction they have to do, the less funding they need from a state legislature. So they're projecting unrealistically high returns. They have too few workers relative to the number of retirees, and as a result, there's a massive multi-trillion-dollar shortfall in pension assets in the country. And for all these reasons, it's time to replace the 60-40 glide path. And now we get to my final slide, and we'll take some Q&A from here. The traditional glide path is that red line, where you start off when the client is young, and we give them a massively high amount of equity allocation. We'll say, right, to a 20 or 30 or 40-year-old client, you ought to be 80% in equities, maybe even 90 or 100%. You're young, you can afford volatility, you don't have a lot of cash, you're adding on dollar cost averaging on a regular basis. So be heavy in equities. And as that client ages, we radically reduce it. By the time they're 60, 65, 70, we've cut that equity allocation to 60%. And when they hit age 70, we're cutting it down to 50. And then by the time they're in their 80s, they might only have 30%, maybe 40% in equities because the client's retired. They can't tolerate volatility. They need more income, and that means bonds. And this is the glide path. By the time they're age 100, should they live that long, you've got no money in equities. It's all in fixed income. That's the traditional glide path, right? Looks very familiar. What I'm arguing is that we need to radically alter this. We need to have a much higher allocation to equities for much longer in the client's lifeline. Instead of 60-40, your typical client needs to be 80-20. They need to have a much higher allocation to growth potential to offset the impact of inflation, and they need to do so far longer in life. I mean, think about this. We would routinely say to a 30-year-old who's a new client, who's never invested before, and expresses concern about risk, what would you say to that client? You've got 40 years to go. You can handle the volatility. Well, if the client is 60, you've got 40 years to go. You can handle the volatility. We need to recognize that longevity is changing everything. The impact on society is going to be unprecedented. We have never faced this situation at any point in the course of human history. We are the first generation that is living as long as we are today. I teach an entirely other course on longevity. One of the big impacts associated with this is that of career planning. The notion that we would grow up, go to school, get a job, retire, and die, the linear lifeline, that was all designed for us to retire at 65 and then have a 10 or 20 year retirement where we, take a cruise around the world, spoil the grandkids, play a lot of golf. But if you retire at 65 today and you've got 30 or 40 years to go, grandkids, golf, and cruises, that's not really going to cut it for 30 or 40 years. We've got to totally rethink the notion of retirement. Retirement was a 20th century innovation. It didn't exist in the 1800s. If you were alive, you worked because you needed to be productive to generate the food you needed to eat. Retirement was invented in the 1900s, coming out of World War II. We weren't able, during the war, to increase salaries, so companies provided benefits. That's where pensions came about. And now we're getting to the point where retiring at 65 with a pension for the rest of your life is simply no longer economically viable for either the provider of that pension or the recipient of it. We need to recognize this massive change in longevity, resulting in massive shifts in society due to medical technology innovation, and it trickles down into your portfolio modeling. You need to rethink the equity allocation. You need to explain to your clients why what they're doing with the portfolios needs to shift, and help them develop a level of comfort with an increased equity allocation for much longer than they realize. With that, we'll open up the question. Don's got a microphone for you, so just raise your hand, let him know.
Thank you. Is it a paradox where you're calling potentially for a financial crisis that it impacts the equity valuations, and then increase in the equity valuations compounds the problem longer term?
Maybe.
Do you have a solution, or what do you project? How do you think people will adjust?
I think what we're experiencing as a result of the crisis that we see coming in the world of longevity. I've been on the boards of the Milken Institute's Center for the Study of Aging and Stanford's Center on Longevity, and MIT's, done work at MIT's Age Lab. And what they're all basically concluding is the elimination of the middle class. We're already beginning to see this, right? People are either falling out of the middle class down into poverty or lower economic strata, or they are rising up into the wealthy class. The report just came out in today's journal. The top 10% of the US population is responsible for 50% of all spending in America. We know that the top 10% are paying all the taxes in America. So we're seeing the elimination of the middle class. This is going to be a crisis for society economically. It isn't necessarily a crisis for the financial markets, because the wealth is being concentrated to such a degree that they're simply dominating the impact. So will it translate into a stock market crash? Not necessarily. Will it turn us, my bigger concern is that it turns us into a scenario similar to the French Revolution, where the middle class falling down to the lower economic strata gets so fed up that they say we're not going to tolerate this anymore. Remember the 99 percenters 20 years ago? And you could argue a lot of the MAGAs today, part of the reason for Trump's success in this election is that people are fed up with their economic plight. That the price of food and gasoline and education and healthcare are so high, and they're struggling to make those payments, and the wealthy don't seem to care. And the more that occurs, the more we see the elimination of the middle class as we go to the barbell extremes, the more society will object. So I see this more of a social an economic issue than necessarily a financial markets issue.
Hi, Rick. I've tried to move the needle with clients as I do retirement income projections for them from off of 90 to 95. And almost 100% of the time I get pushback from clients. Nobody believes they're going to live long. I believe what you're saying. I don't know to what extent. What is your advice to us as financial advisors as to how we position this to our clients to get them to accept this reality? Because pushing an 80% allocation on a 70-year-old, that blows their mind. So
you need to educate them about longevity, as I've begun to do here for you today. That was my second to last book, The Truth About Your Future, which I wrote in 2017, was all about exponential technologies and how these technologies are contributing to expanded life expectancies and the radical changes that I've described for you here. This is totally new and different. It is not anything that anybody ever told them or warned them about, and it is a fundamental educational issue. What got us here will not get us there. We cannot continue to do in the future what we have done in the past. The outcome will not be the same. So you need to reinforce this with education. You need to look for investment alternatives that allow you to achieve the goal that you might not otherwise be able to achieve. And there are a variety of asset management firms that are developing really innovative products. One example is LifeX from Ross Stevens' firm at Stone Ridge, which is creating a really unique set of ETFs that provide guaranteed income to age 100 that insulate the client against loss, because they're predominantly doing it with treasuries, but in a very unique way that allow them to achieve this. So there's a wide variety of product being emerged now to address the longevity problem. So when a client gives you pushback, you need to really dig in. That's what being an advisor is all about, as opposed to being a clerk. The other element of this is recognizing that a lot of clients don't want to live to age 100. It's not that they don't believe you, is that they don't want to, because most people have a vision. If I talk to you about living to an old age, what mental image comes to mind? Whistler's mother, right? We just envision, why do I want to live to age 100 if I'm just going to be sitting in a wheelchair staring out of a window drooling? That's not a future I want. I want to die in my 80s because I don't want that kind of a life. I've seen my parents and grandparents grow old and feeble, suffering from Alzheimer's. We have 2 sessions for you tomorrow on Alzheimer's that'll blow you away. And that's a future nobody envisions favorably, so they don't want to live that long, let alone not believing they'll live that long. What we have to help people recognize is that that's not your future. You're going to live not only longer, but healthier because of medical innovation and technology. Here's a statistic that'll blow your minds. Anybody have kids under the age of 5? Or grandkids under the age of 5? A lot of you do. Your children will grow up never hearing the phrase nursing home. They won't exist in the future. Nursing homes at the moment are one way. You go into a nursing home and you come out in a box. In the future, those who go into nursing homes will walk out, because the rehab will cure whatever has put you in that nursing home in the first place. Many people following surgeries go to a nursing home to recover, and that's what it's going to be in the future. So medical innovation is going to radically change. We're already seeing this. One of my favorites is a guy named Ron Pellman, who set the world record in the Senior Olympics at age 100. We're seeing that people are living longer and healthier. The notion that you're supposed to have a health decline in old age, that's simply not true. We're already living healthier. Look at your age today. Compare your health today to your parents when they were your age now, your grandparents when they were your age now. At age 65, we are far healthier today than our parents were when they were 65, or our grandparents at 65, if they even made it that long. So the future is going to be really exciting. Put it to you this way, and then the time's up, so I'll quit, but I'll just give you these two final thoughts. If you could be at 95 as healthy as you are today, wouldn't you want to still be around? And second, when you are 95, you will be physiologically 55 due to medical innovation. You're going to want to be around, and the key is for your money to allow you to enjoy the lifestyle you are currently enjoying and anticipate wanting to maintain. And it's your job to make sure your clients are positioned to do that. They're not going to pull that off in fixed income. It's going to be equities with a particular overweight in technology stocks, because it's the future of what we're dealing with, as we all know. So I'll say thank you very much for tolerating this little bit of a head game. We're going to go immediately into our next session, and we're going to talk first about, as Don said, a series of conversations right now about the election's impact and Donald Trump's new administration. And the first one we're going to talk about is on the economy. So welcome to the stage for me, Tom Holland, who is the Chief Investment Officer of Orion, and Monica Jalev, who is the Senior Portfolio Manager with Withiam Wealth Management. So please welcome them to the stage.
I would also add, I know several of you had some questions for Rick. Obviously, he's going to be around all day, so you can talk to him at the breaks if you had questions related to this session.
Good to see you. Yeah. Good, thanks. So my son Spencer wishes I was Tom Holland, right? Spider-Man. But I'm not, unfortunately.
So you're Tim instead of Tom.
Yeah. So your point about feeling younger, my wife loves to go back and look at the Golden Girls. Like the Golden Girls cast was like 55 years old, 60, and I'm 56, and I feel hopefully a little bit, so you're absolutely right about all that. That was fascinating.
By the way, Whistler's mother, when Whistler painted her portrait, she was 62.
Really? Yep.
Our version of the future is going to be totally different from everybody else's, and that's why we've got to just adjust it all. I'm really glad to be talking really first off about this, and it kind of as an extension of the question we had earlier about what does all this mean for the economy and such, and you two are as good at being able to deal with this as any. So the big question, and let me, Monica, let me toss this to you first.
Sure.
Is what Donald Trump is proposing pro-growth or inflationary?
Well, the jury's out, right? Because there's a little bit of a tug of war between the policies, right? There is a lot of pro-growth policies out there, right? Deregulation, which was central in his previous agenda. It's also very central this time. That's pro-growth. There is tax cuts, right? Both on the corporate side and an individual side. Those policies will all have the impact of stimulating growth, right? And we'll talk later about some of the more details about these different policies, but those are all pro-growth. But then you have on the other side policies that might create more inflation. In those, I mean, you've heard it a lot. In tariffs, they've been pretty front and center. There's still a lot of talk, but we haven't seen much action yet, and we'll see where it ends. But that is inflationary, as well as immigration, right? Immigration, it could have the potential of, if it's gotten to an extreme, It could be more on the inflationary side. It could slow down the economy. It could have wage pressures. So there is a bit of a tug of war between what is going to stimulate growth and what's going to create inflation.
So are they going to cancel each other out, or will one end up dominant?
I believe this is going to be more pro-growth versus inflationary, because even if you look at what happened in the previous administration, in the previous term that he had, there was tariffs, there was immigration reform. However, inflation was decent, right? It was under 2%. So I think a lot of these policies will really, I think the pro-growth side will end up winning the tug of war.
Some are arguing that the tax cuts in particular are going to make the federal deficit bigger and therefore the federal debt, causing a price to pay eventually. Is that something we need to be worried about in Trump's administration, or is that his successor's problem?
Well, I think I question where all these savings are going to come from, right? Because you can't have them all from tariffs. Or, I think if they're not going to touch Social Security, like you said, and it's going to be the next administration's problems, where are you funding all these? Like if you extend tax cuts and you're doing all these things, they need to come from somewhere.
I mean, Trump just said he wants to make Social Security benefits tax-free. That's just going to make the trust fund problem that much more severe.
Absolutely. So I think, and even, you talk about DOGE and savings, but I think even that is just skimming the surface. I think for real deficit reduction, you have to go after some of the social safety programs, and no one wants to do that, as you said.
So, Tim, what's your view on all that?
So you referenced a journal article about sort of the higher net worth Americans and sort of the weight they carry. I thought there's a brilliant piece Saturday by Niall Ferguson, who's sort of a pretty well-known historian, because we've gotten questions about the debt and the deficit forever, like when's it going to matter? My answer was always, if anyone tells you they know when the debt's going to matter, they're lying to you, because no one knows, right? Other countries have become much more indebted than we have. He makes the point, and this is sort of more further down the road, that if you look at sort of prior empires, including the Brits, including the Spanish Empire from 400 or 500 years ago, when interest expense exceeds defense spending, that's the inflection point. Now, those countries and those entities were sort of still around for a long time after, but I do think we're at a point where we do have to do.
Or how close are we to that?
We're actually spending a little bit more on interest expense than
So we've
defense.
already crossed.
Yeah. So it's just, if you just go look, the article will do a much better job explaining itself than I can, but
I'm a big fan of Neil's. In the pandemic, he said that the number one asset coming out of the pandemic will be Bitcoin.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a fan of his.
Yeah. So recommend the article. So we've sort of crossed the Rubicon, as they say, which has potentially all sorts of geopolitical implications and economic implications for us longer term. I think we're all sort of praying for a growth miracle, AI, robotics, people living longer, staying in the workforce longer. I thought your presentation was brilliant. All the demographic issues you pointed out. It's people and productivity. That's what makes an economy grow. And if you have fewer babies, fewer people. It was interesting to me how few people in this room, and I have 2 kids. I'm one of 5, right? I have 2. I was not surprised, but kind of surprised how few of us raised their hands when Rick asked if anyone had a child under 5 or even a grandchild under 5, right?
30% of people told Gallup in a survey this past summer, 30% of those under the age of 50 said they expect to never have children.
Yeah. So we've crossed that Rubicon. If you look at the replacement rate being 2.1 here, South Korea, other countries are shrinking.
So you know
rapidly.
the population pyramid? We're all familiar with that, where the very few old people at the top, and as you get younger, it gets wider, and all the young are at the bottom. That pyramid now, if you look at it, it's a box. Yeah. We now have as many old people as young people, particularly in our industry. We have more CFPs over the age of 70 than under the age of 30. So we're becoming a box, and that means that we are increasingly dependent on immigration.
Yeah.
In some Scandinavian countries, they are now paying immigrants to come because they're producing so few babies on their own. They need to import people to make up for the lack of people already there, which goes back to the immigration question, Monica, that if we aren't producing enough babies here in the US, and we're not, we need 2.1 babies per woman to sustain our population. The US is at 1.7. So we aren't producing enough people to sustain our population. So we need immigration to make up the shortfall. At the very moment, Trump's moving a lot of them out. So given that we don't have enough babies to become future workers and paying future taxes, talk about the implications of the immigration policy on all of this from a workforce perspective.
Yeah, and one interesting statistic that I recently read, which is over the last 4 years, 100% of the labor force growth has been from foreign-born immigrants, right? Not illegal, but foreign-born immigrants. So we do need that to continue growing the economy. So, you know, they say there is the legal programs to attract skilled talent are still there. But, you know, when you think about the industries that are going to be impacted, you know, no one wants to do certain jobs that are what the people that are being deported are doing, right? No one wants to be, you know, cutting strawberries out in the field for 2 hours. So agriculture, construction, hospitality. Those industries are going to be the industries that are more severely impacted by this. And, you know, I think that it's still, I've heard the bad people first, right? So I hope it continues to be that way, because we will see labor shortages and wage pressures if this continues to be done at a greater scale.
We're already beginning to see this, not just in Norway, where they are paying for immigrants to come. We're seeing it happen in Arkansas. Yeah. Arkansas will pay you $10,000 if you'll move to Arkansas, because they need people to move there and create jobs, because so many are leaving. Maine is doing the same thing, because young people are looking at the lack of economic opportunity and they're leaving Maine. So states are already beginning to realize this individually.
And the point I'd make about the border, so border crossings have already plunged, right? And not to get into politics of it all, and it seemed like it started when Joe Biden sort of pivoted going into the election to try and kind of tighten things up. So I think Monica's right. The big question, I think, is, or the big wild card is sort of this mass deportation thing, because I think the economy can probably tolerate a gradual tightening of labor availability. You do something big like that, and it'll hit the numbers pretty hard. But to your point, Rick, you know, birth rates have already plunged across the Western world anyway, Latin America included. The only place really where the world seems to be above the replacement rate, that 2.1 that Rick talked about, is sub-Saharan Africa. And demographers doubt even if that's still growing as quickly as people think. There's a great book, Empty Planet. It's a riff on the Lonely Planet travel series. So again, demographics is destiny. We could talk about this forever, but we do need people. We'll see where immigration policy goes, and if we don't get more people, we need more productivity. So to your point, tech stocks, AI, robotics, if something's gonna kind of keep this economy going as we get older, it's really gonna be innovation. And I do think we can kind of grow our way through some of these demographic challenges as long as we treat capital well, the markets still work, and we kind of embrace that innovation and disruption. And I think, not to pivot too far afield, I think Donald Trump, like him or dislike him, may end up saving Western Europe from itself. If you think about what those markets are doing year to date, they're all kind of ripping, and the fundamentals are terrible, but it looks like maybe this sort of policy shock from the other side of the Atlantic is forcing the Germans and the French and Northern European countries writ large to look at themselves and say, we're not growing, our demographics are terrible, we can't defend ourselves, we've got to do something. So again, like or dislike the fellow in the White House, he could be this catalyst, I think, for innovation in parts of the world that sorely need it, because they're even in a tougher spot than we are in terms of availability of the labor and sort of what the economy has going for it, if that makes sense.
And to your point about what's happening around the world, demographically, it's really true. China just had a 25% drop in the number of marriages last year. Wow. Marriages, of course, the prelude to babies. Their population growth is now down to about 1.5. So they're recognizing a big problem in being able to replace their population. That's one of the reasons people argue they're so interested in Taiwan, because they need the population base. In Europe, it's around 1.6 overall. It varies country to country, but they aren't producing enough babies either. The worst in the world is South Korea, where they're 0.68 babies per woman. So they are literally going to evaporate over the next couple of half century because they're not producing enough children. And to your point about Africa, the most populous country in the world by 2070 is projected to be Nigeria.
Yeah.
They're producing 7 babies per woman. So they are going to become the largest country in the world by population, and with it, the economic engine and growth.
You hope, yeah.
Which argues for, as you work out that portfolio modeling, more and more of an increase into foreign investing, no?
Yeah. This could be, it's been 15 years of the U.S. just trouncing the rest of the world, right? We're in this business. We know the markets pretty well. We pay attention to them. The Mag 7, for sure, have been a part of that narrative. But you really have to go back to the 2000s when the rest of the world did better than the U.S., right? And then coming out of the Great Recession, you had the European debt crisis. They didn't handle the pandemic as well as we did, so on and so forth. So this could be an inflection point. We've been overweight the U.S. We've been overweight growth. That's been the right place to be. But I think one of the things in this business that we always have to remind ourselves is to be intellectually honest and a little bit humble. And so we're having those conversations now. And I think your earlier point, Rick, in your presentation about just more U.S. equity or more equity writ large makes a ton of sense. When I joined Brinker Capital, which was my company before Orion bought Brinker, Chuck Widger, who you probably know, our founder, when I met him, he was 70, and he was 80% equities. And he's 77 now, and he looks great, and he's doing great, and he's still all in. I think that mind shift is really important and is really worth pursuing for sure.
So how does this translate into the winners and losers from an industrial sector perspective? Who's going to do well, who's not?
So I'll take the first part of that. So I think the more emerging industries are key beneficiaries of deregulation, right? And we're talking AI, cryptocurrencies. I think those will be real beneficiaries of this. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, I think could be more of on the losing side of things. And then when you think about also on the deregulation side, healthcare could be a big beneficiary because they're typically heavily regulated. So I think those, in my mind, are some of the key winners and losers.
Yeah, there's a great saying, I think, in DC, personnel is policy, right? The people you put in charge, the EPA, the FTC, so on and so forth, have a huge impact on how those regulatory bodies go about their business. So if you think about the energy industry, right, much more benign regulatory construct. Financial services stocks are doing really well year to date. Jamie Dimon, not that I know him, and he's a lot smarter and better known than I'll ever be. He talks about how banks have been over-regulated for 15 years now, Graham Dodd, and coming out of the global financial crisis. So legislation is hard. Regulation's a lot easier, even if they can be undone by the next administration. But I would think those two parts of the economy should benefit quickly from a more benign regulatory construct, from a friendlier White House. And to Monica's point, if you think about regulations, if you think about taxes, anything that makes life easier for a company reduces the cost of capital, right? If you get to keep more of what you make, or if it's a less onerous regulatory construct, you're spending less money on lawyers and accountants, which means you'll take more risk, right? That deal makes more sense because the after-tax rate of return, projected return, goes up. So I think if you're Donald Trump, and this is where the uncertainty bites, I mean, you want those animal spirits, you want that M&A activity, you want new companies being formed. And not that he's asking my opinion, I think the longer there's less certainty around trade and tariffs, the more those animal spirits, which all spiked post-November 5th, right, like or dislike the fellow who won the election, the more those kind of continue to come in and CEOs start to sit on their hands again. But that's how we're thinking about it from a sector perspective.
And also to add, small companies, small cap companies also tend to be beneficiaries, right? Because to the cost of capital comment that Tim just made, now it's going to cost them less to do business, so they can invest, they can continue to grow their business. So I think they're also key beneficiaries.
And they're more agile. It's easier for them to pivot than a major corporation can.
Yeah.
Elaborate for me, Monica, about your comment regarding construction. It would seem, on the one hand, that the changing dynamic would cause massive regeneration. I mean, look how we're shifting with the work from home environment. We've got to re-envision urban areas because of this. Wouldn't that be bullish for the construction and development industry elaborate on your thoughts on
It
construction.
would. I agree with that. It would be bullish. However, usually the type of labor that is employed by the construction industry is the type of labor that's being reduced, let's say.
So the lack of talent equals increased costs.
And I think if you have, I mean, I don't want to make this generalization, but I think construction, it's a profile of a worker, right? And not everyone will want. If that labor supply is reduced, it's going to be harder to fill that supply, and either you're going to have to pay more, or you have to shift somehow to attract that labor to what you need to do. That's where I see some impact by what's happening with immigration.
And there's no economy of scale. There's only so many nails a carpenter can hit in an hour. So unlike technology or financial services where there is massive scale potential, real estate's a little bit limited in that regard.
Correct.
I do think, if I could add around sort of one of the upsides of sort of return to office or return to work. I know some folks aren't happy about it. Amazon's doing it, JP Morgan's doing it, Goldman Sachs is doing it. Our company, much smaller, we're in 3 days a week. Up until last October, we were fully remote. Went to 2 days and then 3 days. I think if we're worried about a commercial real estate crisis, if you remember Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, Sovereign, urban core, there are some cities that are struggling relative to others, but I do think if there's an upside to RTO, even if some folks don't want those commutes and sort of the going back and forth to the office, I do think if commercial real estate was some sort of structural risk to the economy 2 or 3 years ago, I think if that was real, I know those bank failures were all the biggest bank failures in the history of the United States, I think, except for Wachovia, I think, during the Great Recession. I think that pain point is probably past. Because if you go back to March 2003, we had all 3 banks fail, and folks, at least our clients, were really worried commercial real estate was going to drag down the broader economy. I think if those office buildings are more full now than they were 2 years ago, that probably dissipates a lot of that risk.
Talk about the residential real estate market.
Yeah.
Is that different from the commercial side?
I think it also, different areas, different markets have different dynamics, because there is, and I just went to Austin, I don't know, a couple of months ago for the first time, and it was such a great city, right? And I think there's this urban areas where people want to live, but they want to have everything kind of right there. I think that's where there's opportunities. But then there is other markets, where impacted by people working remotely. And one side note to Tim's comment on the working remotely or going back to the office, I think the people, productivity, just the exchange of ideas, I think it's better that people are actually back to the office, because I think the younger generations that were just kind of getting used to working from home did not have a lot of that learning by watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But going back to real estate, I think some of these markets, residential real estate, I feel like there's markets where have great opportunities, but others that it feels a little bit more stale, older, where not as many opportunities for growth.
Feel that way, Tim?
Yeah, no, I drove in last night. There was an accident on 95, so it took a bit longer. I hadn't been down here in a couple years, and I think everybody's moving to Florida, has already moved to Florida, or Arkansas. I think this is sort of another tangent. I think one of the great things about our system is the idea of federalism, that people and money and companies can go where they're really well treated, right? A lot of folks have decamped to Texas from Northern California. I'm not throwing California under the bus. It's a great place, but it forces you to compete for capital and people, and that usually is the catalyst for reform and just better governance. So I just think that lends a vibrancy to the U.S. that most other countries don't have, where it tends to be more monolithic in terms of tax and regulatory ideas. I think housing's a huge issue. Affordability is a huge issue. You talked about sort of the French Revolution framework. You've got a generation of younger millennials and some I guess Gen Z folks, if I'm thinking of it the right way, that want to buy a house and just can't buy a house.
Yeah, 40 years ago, the first-time home buyer was an average of 28. Now it's 38. People are being priced out
Yeah.
of the ability to buy homes, let alone the reduced inventory. You've got older Americans who refinanced during the earlier part of the decade and of the century, and so they've locked in 2% and 3% mortgages. They don't want to sell because they'd have to replace it with a 6% mortgage, and they feel that they can't afford to do that, so they're not willing to put their house on the market. And home prices are skyrocketing due to the limited supply that we've seen. The average home in America is now pushing $500,000, which is dramatically higher than the average income in America, which is just creating all of this issue. We now have 40% of Americans between 25 and 40% of them live at home with their parents. And it's because they're unable to afford buying their own home. And they're delaying getting married, they're delaying having children, they're reducing the number of children they have, they're not buying homes, which reduces the economic impact on the economy. So do you see this scenario sustaining itself, or do you see it?
Well, as a father of a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, I hope they fix this soon, because I love my kids, but coming down to the kitchen every morning and just seeing the whole thing messed up in 10 years is going to be hard. I don't know. I mean, I'm a free market kind of guy, let things sort of sort themselves out, price cures price, all of that. But we do seem to have, the housing market seems structurally broken. And I don't know how you create supply to create opportunity for all those folks who want to own homes and build wealth over time, right? You think about what wealth was created by owning a house in the US in the last 30, 40, 50 years. And now you have, again, 25, 30, 45-year-olds who don't even own a home. I am fascinated by demographics. That's why I always enjoy Rick's presentations, but I thought that was really, really fascinating stuff. And I'm just super curious to see how the next 10 or 15 years play out. Mick Jagger is still out there at 81. Do people work to 70 to 75? Does longevity cure a lot of these problems in terms of Social Security, trust fund, and maybe housing? But I don't know. What do you guys?
Monica knows.
Yeah, Monica, what do you think?
I think also people, like younger generations, they can't afford it, but I think even if they could, they might not want to.
Okay.
So I think there is that dynamic as well where, or maybe that's what they say because they can't.
The burdens of home ownership, you mean? They don't want it?
Like they're much better living in their, kind of like urban area where they have everything there, but they don't have to deal with.
Or their lives are more transitory and they don't want to be anchored by home ownership?
I believe so.
But how does that translate to the commercial real estate market if in fact we're producing fewer young people relative to the number of old people, and there aren't enough people to, as the older folks eventually do die, and 10,000 a day are dying, who's going to be around, who's going to be willing and able to buy their homes if we have too few young people and too few of them being able to afford that home? What will that happen as the older folks need to liquidate and sell?
That is a good question. I don't know what, I'm sure there's a little bit of, you go from one place to the other.
Who's got the answer?
Okay, someone
good.
does.
Several who say they have the answer.
Three of you, that's fantastic.
Don, where's, you've got an answer?
Prices will come down.
Oh, that's your answer, that we're screwed. Okay. So,
Price cures price, right?
you've got an answer?
Oh, I just think it's a cultural aspect to what I look at it.
And you're how old?
23.
Do you want to own a home?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's all about home equity and building equity for your life. And not to talk bad about my generation, we just don't want to work hard anymore. I mean, I see it with people I went to school with. They want everything given. You want everything given to yourself. I mean, I've worked my whole life. I have a mother that was an immigrant from Italy. She taught me how to work hard, earn it. Nothing's ever going to be given to you. And I think a lot of people just don't want to work hard anymore. They want that fancy house now. They want that fancy car. They want the nice suit. They want the nice jacket. With my generation, I'm not talking about the older generation.
So this is actually part of the dynamic shift, isn't it, in social attitudes? When I grew up, 'cause I'll date myself at 66, I never heard the phrase work-life balance. There was no such thing. I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My parents own a family business, and they work 7 days a week. And so my brothers and I all do the same. And the notion of work-life balance never existed. Today, it's a dominant topic in conversation. And I think that your generation is more right than mine. I think there is more to life than work, and we're kind of wrong, but at the expense of productivity, economic reward, sustainability of lifestyle, and so on. So I think we're all trying to figure this out, and whether your generation is right or wrong doesn't matter, because we're going to be dead and you're going to take over. So yours will be the way. So we need to acknowledge and adjust for this scenario, I think, more than not. We can't resist it. We can't convince you to do it our way.
I also think that my generation is more like the credit cards and spending. All we do is spend. Or my parents, all they did was save. You have a lot of older folks that save for the rainy day.
So what do you all think his future's going to be? Pretty good, huh?
It's going to crush it. What's your name?
Joe.
Joe? If you're ever interested in joining a fintech, send me your resume, okay? Seriously.
I work at a IRA in
I'm
Delaware.
not trying to poach it from anyone,
but I see it firsthand. I've worked since I was 14 years old. No one wants to work anymore. I mean, you go out, it's double the cost to go eat if you take your mother or dad out to dinner. Gas is more expensive. People rather rent more and then rather have the equity in the home. Well, what if your landlord comes the next day and, hey, you got to leave? What are you going to do? I mean, a lot of folks don't want to own anything.
So let's look at the impact on social policy responding to this. We've got younger Americans who are struggling to afford homes. Yep. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to what Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have been doing. It started under the Obama administration. Biden perpetuated it, where back in the about 40, 50 years ago, the average U.S. homeowner put 20% down on buying a house. Today, they'll lend you. We had a 30% loan-to-value ratio. Now it's 43%, and you can go in with a house with as little as 3% down. Yeah. And the result is that so many people have bought homes that they cannot afford. Yeah. It's becoming reminiscent of 2008. So the question is increasingly being raised about the overall impact, because they say real estate controls the economy. Yep. Any reaction to all that?
So I think, to your point, especially coming through 2008 and 2009, sort of backstopping Fannie and Freddie, there have been all sorts of legal battles as to whether or not they should, I think, still sort of reside as under this conservatorship of the U.S. government. If you make money cheap, people do silly things like buy homes that they can't afford. I would hope that, not that I'm happy about the lack of supply, that we underbuilt so badly from a single-family home perspective through the teens that even if we've done some things maybe from a policy perspective that weren't prudent, it won't come back and blow up the way it did in 2008 and 2009. Because that's why 2008 and 2009 was so bad, because it was real estate led. Real estate is a levered asset class. When the value of the asset goes down, the burden of the debt does not. And you just end up in a really, really bad spot. That's why real estate, commercial residential real estate led downturns, which are rare, are so painful, because you cut rates, but there's nothing to refi because you're so far underwater, right? So hopefully we're not setting ourselves up for something like that. I do think around people not owning homes anymore, the tax code is probably the most powerful thing the U.S. government has ever come up with to influence personal behavior. We want you to have kids, child tax credit. When you get married, marriage tax credit. Once you buy a house, income interest on the mortgage is tax deductible. So maybe as we go from a home ownership society to a rental or renter society, I wonder if there's going to be any pressure for DC to think about that very generous and very meaningful treatment of interest expense.
Especially since most of the mortgage interest deduction is going to more affluent individuals. Yeah. And not to the benefit of lower income who aren't owning those homes in the first place. Yeah. You mentioned interest rates. So Monica, let's shift the conversation to interest rates and the dollar. With all of the stuff going on in Washington right now, what's the outlook for interest rates and the dollar?
I think it's higher. When you think about what the Fed is saying.
The opposite of what Trump said he would do.
I mean, it's market forces. So if you think about the Fed is saying we are going to be on a wait and see approach, right? We don't know what the impact of some of these policies will be. We're still, even though we've made really good progress on the fight against inflation, we're still not where we want to be. And I personally think that 2%, we might be in a new interest rate environment where maybe that is maybe 2.5 or somewhere that's higher than 2%. But they are being cautious in terms of easing, right, on rates, because they want to see what the inflation impact of all these policies and how things are going to work together. So I think if you think about that, that's already keeping rates for higher. Deficits would have the impact of keeping rates higher. You know, with inflationary impact of tariffs or immigration would also keep rates higher. So I think we are going to be seeing higher interest rates for some time. And
Meaning where they are, or they're actually going to go up?
I mean, I don't, so there's still the case that there's going to be 2 rate cuts this year. So I don't think the Fed is leaning towards raising rates, but you know, we don't know what's going to, like if there is a meaningful shift higher in inflation, they will have to raise rates. I don't think that's the base case for rates to be higher, but higher meaning we are at this higher rate environment currently.
You feel the same way, Tim?
I think so. Again, sort of stepping back, you know, a lot of people think that sort of low interest rate inflation environment coming out of the Great Recession through the pandemic was not a new normal, was this abnormal stretch, right, because of the real estate crisis and all that. And that we are, you know, sort of living in a more normal period again in terms of interest rates with the 10-year at 4.3%, Fed funds at 4 and change. I think the market can tolerate the Fed going sideways or maybe even obviously cutting one or two more times. I think the market would be spooked beyond belief if the Fed had to pivot to rate hikes, because there goes the bond market, I think, and with the bond market and yields spiking up, there goes sort of PE multiples on stocks. So I don't think that's priced in. Obviously, I don't think the market wants to see that. I don't think we'll get it. But again, back to your point around demographics and older America and older world, I just wonder, you know, some people think that's deflationary because people are going to be spending less, but some people think it'll be inflationary because there's just less labor supply. So I do think, at the risk of getting too macro, I do think these questions around demographics, we're at this point where they could have huge consequences.
So demographics are going to dictate everything.
Yeah, and I just don't know. Obviously, no one, if anyone does know, Joe, anyone else, raise your hand again. But I just think we are at this really interesting, unprecedented point.
We're going to see a reduction in elementary schools over the next 20 years and an increase in the number of healthcare facilities.
Yeah.
In Japan, my favorite statistic of all, they sell more adult diapers than baby diapers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I think we're sideways to slightly down. I do think, back to policy and Donald Trump, the easy stuff if you're Donald Trump is, I'm going to raise tariffs and I'm going to come in with Elon Musk and fire people, right? Because that's a stroke of a pen. Cutting taxes is hard work. And I guess there was talk that maybe Speaker Johnson would have a vote today on this one big beautiful bill, or votes coming up. So the things, to Monica's points earlier, that are a little more inflationary, like tariffs and trade policy, that's easily done. Cutting taxes, extending the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, doing some heavy lifting around government efficiency, that's harder, it takes longer. So I think if you're Donald Trump, and again, he's a lot smarter than I am and sort of just pulled off the greatest political comeback in our country's history, he's got to kind of know that, right? He sort of punted on tariffs once already, but now they're coming back on March 3rd or March 4th. Even though the Canadians and the Mexican government said we're going to do some things around the border, I wonder how hard he's going to go on trade and tariffs until he's got a clear sign from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue that those tax cuts are going to be.
So translate that into risk of the economy. What's the biggest risk to the economy and the markets?
I do think it's a spike in inflation that's just not priced in, and if tariffs are an accelerant for that, that's not going to be good. I think the 10-year yield north of 5% spooks the S&P. It's done it twice in the last 2 years, give or take. Again, Donald Trump's smarter than me. I know he knows this. He's always used the market as a gauge of his political acumen and success. At least he did in the first term, but he's a lame duck. So again, the big thing is, and I don't know what he's thinking. I don't think anyone does except he does. You know, how far is he willing to go to maybe fundamentally reorder global trade and supply chains and our economic model, even at the risk of, you know, hitting the market really, really hard, knowing he's not going to run for re-election ever again, and in less than 2 years, the Republicans probably lose the House, and then they're done. So again, I apologize. I should have told Rick I was going to come to Florida with more questions and no answers, but that's,
Monica?
That's the big one for me.
So I think one of the risks right now is that it's elevated uncertainty, right? Markets don't like uncertainty. There's a lot, and even from companies and from a business investment perspective, if you know the tariffs are coming and you know what they are, you can adjust for that, right? Or you can shift your supply chain. You can do things when you know what's happening. Right now, you don't know, or we don't know, and there's a lot in flux, and there's a lot of talk, and yes, they pushed the tariffs, a month, and they're saying they're coming. However, it's like companies cannot adjust. You cannot adjust to what you don't know.
Get ready for your questions. My last one for you then, Monica, is what do we do about it? How do we handle the portfolio management, asset allocation, client strategy?
A couple of thoughts. I mean, I think we are in a higher volatility environment, higher interest rate volatility environment as well. So having investments or exposure to an asset class that benefits from volatility would be one way to hedge the portfolio or to have investments within.
That sounds like crypto.
I think crypto, and crypto is a great way to have a growth in the portfolio that is less correlated, to everything else, to stock markets, to the economy per se. So yes, absolutely. Having also inflation hedges, real assets, infrastructure, commodities, things that will benefit if we do get that spike that Tim is mentioning on the maybe we're not pricing in that inflation. Having those assets that will benefit from that environment, I think makes sense.
You
to have in
prefer
a
tips
portfolio.
over treasuries?
I don't know where the equivalent rate is currently on tips. We usually do more the pure treasuries versus the tips because it's always been kind of hard to get it right on the tip side.
Tim?
Yeah, no, I would echo Monica's thoughts. Diversifying to real assets, infrastructure at the margins, going out and sort of going for duration probably doesn't make sense right now, even if you're not running credit risk with the U.S. government. High yield spreads are super tight. If you get any sort of hiccup in the economy, those are probably not going to do well. So high quality investment grade credit, more of a bias towards the U.S. and then into sort of assets, diversifying assets that should do well in a higher for longer inflationary environment makes sense.
Thanks. Good morning. I was wondering how much of our discussion might be just driving and looking at the hood ornament. Meaning all of the things that we're talking about are today's problems and today's solutions. What about artificial intelligence, robotics, the ability to 3D print homes, the ability to have swarms of drones picking strawberries? Yep. Those things are coming down the pike. So perhaps we should be talking about those coming solutions as well.
I'll start. Absolutely, and I think the AI and robotics and all of these innovations is going to help with the demographics, right, and increasing the productivity. Because if we're not having the other side, we need to improve productivity. However, my view is that some of these things, it's still some time down the road, and we need to deal with some of these issues like the deficits, the fiscal deficits. It's a problem now, and I think. Tim made a comment earlier about we're at that almost breaking point. So I agree with you that all of these is going to help us get to the next level. And some of these things we might not even really, starting with AI, really know what the real impact will be. I think maybe we're pricing in a fraction of what that could be. But I think we also have some real problems that if we don't address now, they will continue to be a problem and also hinder our growth long term.
I would just add quickly, if I could, if you want to be optimistic, and I consider myself an optimist, even though I grew up in New Jersey, All right, just kidding. But I did. So think about the 1990s, right? And this may sound way too Pollyannish, but 95 through 99, the S&P was up 20% plus 5 years in a row, right? You had the Fed pull off a soft landing, and you had the emergence of the internet, right? And so you fast forward 30 years, maybe it's AI, maybe it's the Fed pulling off a soft landing. You've had 2 years in a row of 25% returns on the S&P 500. Now, stocks are expensive. I get all of that. But all the stuff you're talking about, I think is real, is coming. I assume a ton of money is going to be misspent and misallocated because that's how the economy works. But those kind of innovations should lead to greater productivity, which would compensate for maybe a smaller workforce. I think we need that. I think if we don't get it, we're in trouble. But I do think we're lucky in that. I think we are going to get it because we still remain the world's most innovative economy, because I think we treat capital and entrepreneurs better than just about any other country in the world. As long as we don't mess that up, I think we can solve for a lot of this, and I think we can grow our way out of it.
There's often an error that people make in exponential technologies. I invented the first exponential technologies ETF, the BlackRock XT is the symbol, ETF, before Kathy did her stuff at ARC. And the misconception that people engage in is that they focus on technological innovation and development. And as Tim said, a lot of that just gets blown up because they just fail in their business activities. What I've found to be very effective is not to focus solely on the developers of innovative tech, but the users of it. Amazon has more than 1 million robots in its warehouses. Didn't invent a lot of them. It's starting to engage in invention. But they buy the robots that others are building, or they commission the work to be done. So focus on companies that are using tech to build their business, as opposed to the companies that are inventing the tech. It's often a little bit ratcheted down of the risk level, but the benefits are equally there too. But technology, for sure, to both your points, is really important. Don?
Your comments have been very helpful. One question I have is, it seems like we have the greatest amount of government debt coming due in the next couple of months, and basically how that's going to be handled, considering the disconnect between President Trump and Chairman Powell. And I guess that's the question.
So as long as the bond market doesn't balk, they're going to refi that. I think they're going to go shorter end of the curve as opposed to longer end of the curve. Bessent seems to have been very well, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, by all accounts is a brilliant investor and very well known, not just on Wall Street, but across sort of capitals around the world and by heads of central banks, and seems to be very well regarded. So they're gonna roll that paper over, and they're gonna hope the bond market can digest it. The bond market's behaving itself. To a certain extent, at the risk of wishing for the bond market not to behave itself, I think the only thing that's going to force the government to get its act together fiscally is for the bond market to say enough, and the bond market's not saying enough. So that's probably good for economic growth, but probably not good for our long-term fiscal picture.
Monica, any thoughts?
I think that this is going to be, we're going to kick the ball down the road, right? I mean, we're going to continue doing that. I think the rates, as we discussed earlier, the level of interest rates remains where it is, or that's like the base case. So I just think we continue to refinance. I agree with Tim that it's going to be on the shorter end, but you know, we didn't have time to talk about Scott Bessent's 333 plan, but you know, I think all of these things, it's early to see how they're all going to end up interacting together.
We're going to take a break now for a half hour. On our next session, we're going to talk about the election's impact on the stock market. And then after that, we're going to talk about the impact on the bond market. So we'll tackle both of that a lot further. And your MC in those sessions is going to be Caleb Silver, who's the editor-in-chief of Investopedia. So watch for those two great sessions. You have a chance to check your emails and network a bit for 30 minutes. Please extend my thanks to both Tim and Monica for this session here today. Thank you both.